I'm at ChillerCon here at the Royal Hotel in Scarborough, and I'm joined by Grady Hendrix. You know him from Horror Store and the Southern. What is it called?
The book with the ridiculously long title. Yeah, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, or as it's been called a lot of times, the Southern Vampire's Guide to Slaying Book Clubs.
My Best Friend's Exorcism, and most lately, well, of course, Paperbacks from Hell, and most lately, the Final Girl Support Club. Grady, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. How are you finding ChillerCon so far?
Chill.
Yeah.
This is a very relaxed con. I'm enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've read an awful lot of horror books and seen a lot of horror movies.
Yes.
Do you think there are any particular differences between the UK and the British and the American approach to horror?
100%.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I'm always jealous of is I love folk horror. And when I was a kid, we actually lived in Dulwich for a couple of years. And they had a Reader's Digest book called Myths and Folklore of the British Isles, I think, or Great Britain, that I was obsessed with as a little kid. Great pictures, woodcuts of witches being tortured, all that stuff. So that sort of, in the fields in the Faroes kind of thing, the menace under the earth. I love that. And there's no American equivalent. America has Children of the Corn, Harvest Home, and that's pretty much it.
Right.
It's our big, iconic bits of folk horror. You guys, Witchfinder General, The Blood on Satan's Claw, The Wicker Man, It goes on and on and on. The Stone, there's so much stuff. And Penda's Fen. And I feel like that is really missing in America, because the problem with America is you start talking about the past and you immediately get into the two original sins of America. Slavery was one, and then the second is the genocide against indigenous Americans.
Right.
And so, there's always that joke about like, oh, the hotel's built on an Indian burial mound, blah, blah, blah. The United States, the whole country is an Indian burial mound. And so we are really, it's one of the things we deal with slavery and wrestle with that more than we do about that original genocide. And it's one of those things, it's just sort of this like stone wall in the past. We can't go past it. We can't deal with it. We can't handle it. And so that historic tradition, that folk horror tradition in America, it just never got a good foothold because of that. Here, I'm sure, the UK has lots of atrocities. Every country does in their history, but you guys talk about your past in a very different way and have a very different past than the States does. So yeah, I'm always jealous of that folk horror tradition. And, I was here in the 70s. So that British children's programming in the 70s, I was watching, Sapphire and Steel and Blake Seven, the Tom Baker Doctor Who. That stuff is so dark compared to American television. The sets are a lot shakier too.
Yeah.
But I tried to rewatch Blake Seven recently, and I was like, okay, I'll stick with my memories. But they really made an impact. They were just so much darker and felt so much more adult than children's programming in the States did at the time.
It feels like a fertile area for sort of inspiring a lot of the horror that's coming around today from the current generation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, look at like something like Inside Number 9,
Yes.
which I think is absolute genius. And that's so. They'll have those episodes like what's the one, the Devil, the Spirit of Christmas or whatever, the Krampus
Yes,
one,
that's
which
fantastic.
is an old BBC show.
Uh-huh.
It's just like it's so brilliant. Their Witchfinder show.
Yes.
It's just really brilliant the way they engage with sort of the history of British television.
Well, we can talk about a bit more about that. Before we do, for those who don't know about the Final Girl Support Club, can you tell us a bit about that book?
Yeah, so I started writing this book in 2014. I had the title first. I've had 2 times in my career where I've had the title and then the book, and those were lucky. One was My Best Friend's Exorcism, which I basically sold to my publisher on the title. They're like, oh, I want that. And then I had to sort of figure out the book, and the whole book's right there on the title, so it's useful. Same with Final Girl Support Group, which is, there's the entire book right there. Everything in the book comes from that title. Like, how does that work? Where are they? What would they be like? And but it's essentially taking the conceit that final girls in horror movies, the last woman left alive who kills the killer, are real. And all these franchises have been based on actual crimes that happened to them. And this is 30 years later for most of them. They're in this support group. They're starting to question why they're still in here. And what am I still doing, obsessed with something that happened when I was a teenager? And the most damaged member of the group and the most unreliable, Lynette, one of them dies, and Lynette becomes convinced they're being killed one by one. And everyone's convinced that she's going nuts. As someone pointed out to me, and I hated them for doing this, they were like, oh, so it's basically Watchmen with slasher movies where she's Rorschach and everyone thinks there's a hero killer. And I'm like, God damn it. Like, because it's not as good as Watchmen or as accomplished as Watchmen, but I'm like, it is very similar. Shit. Fortunately, they told me that after it was already published, so I couldn't change anything.
Yeah.
But if I'd known that during, I would have not written the book.
No, well, I'm glad you did. Last night you presented a show in here about essentially final girls and stuff, which was a great show. I thought. How important is it for you when you're going to some an event like this to be able to put on a show, do something a bit different?
Yeah, that's what I do. Like when I was doing book tour for Horror Store, my first novel, I did an author event where you read from the book and you do. It was awful. I wanted to kill myself. The audience wanted to die. Mm-hmm. And, we all have friends who write books, and you go to their author events very reluctantly. It's not fun, usually. And so I was like, what could be fun? And so I started working on it. I started doing it with my best friend's exorcism, but it really came into fruition with Paperbacks from Hell. So I did one for that, and we sold our souls. I was going to do one for Southern Book Club, but there was a pandemic. I've got one for Final Girls. I've got a Christmas one. Wow. I just think it's fun for people. And it's... I want people, if people have taken the trouble to come see my crap, I want them to have a good time. I want them to be entertained, you know? And I feel like I could talk about me, but isn't it cooler to talk about why we're obsessed with serial killers and books and the history of that and where it comes from and have slides and sing stupid songs and do all that? So, yeah, I love doing it, so.
And it was a very, very funny show and really informative and... I think there's a lot of information in it and a lot of stuff.
Too much, but yeah.
Just these incredible strands about where does this come from and this comes to that. But towards the end, it actually gets quite moving when you talk about you're watching Friday the 13th Part 2 and the final girl from that and her fate and you watching it as a fan and all the emotions that you felt. And do you think horror fans generally get a bad rap for people thinking that they don't care about the characters on screen? They just want to see people acting.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I love a good kill as much as the next person. I've sat in a theater and watched Peter Jackson's Dead Alive or Brain Dead as it got retitled and cheered with the lawnmower scene. It's fun, you know, but the stuff that sticks with people, and for the most part, it's the stuff where you're rooting for a character and you care about a character. One of the genius things in Wes Craven's Scream, I think, is in rewatching Scream, it's just like, how did he pull this off? But they often do a thing in horror movies where they'll say, oh, we're going to kill a character you like early on, because then you don't, all bets are off. Anyone could die. And no, I've seen enough horror movies. I can tell you exactly who's going to die, probably in what order, no matter what you try to pull as a trick. But what they do in Scream that's so great is they let characters fight back and actually either almost escape or escape. And then you're like, oh, any character could live. And so every encounter with the killer becomes that much more fraught because you're like, this doesn't necessarily have to be the bit where the best friend gets killed. Yeah. This could be the best friend escaping, and so it takes you by surprise. I feel like that's where we don't root, unless you're really disturbed, we don't root for the alien in Alien. We root for Ripley. We don't root for... I mean, some people do, and I get that Michael Myers is iconic, but I'm rooting for Jamie Lee Curtis. I want Alice Johnson in Nightmare 4 to win. Who's rooting for Freddy? Freddy's fun, he's a blast, but he's annoying. He's like the weird uncle who just keeps doing magic tricks past the point where they're entertaining at a family gathering. I want, Heather Langenkamp to win. So I feel like horror earned its bad rap, to be honest, in the early 90s when it got really gore-oriented and really grim-dark. But I feel like there's so much more to it.
You think it's the absence of empathy makes a difference?
You mean in the part of the viewer or the filmmaker?
Or the writer.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I also think that's hard. I will someone like Thomas Ligotti, who writes really dark books. I have a hard time with them. I admire their craft, I think, but I can't do this kind of we're all just worms in the in an uncaring universe to be crushed beneath the feet of winds of fate. I can't. The world is full of family I love and friends I love and people I love and care about. And one of the things that I'm a zombie guy. I think we all have a genre that we gravitate for with films, and mine are zombies. I saw Dawn of the Dead when I was way too young.
Sure.
And I love zombie movies. But one of the things that drives me nuts is people have shown over and over doing actual social science that in a disaster, more often than not, people are altruistic and will help each other. This whole thing of don't let them in the shelter, make them stay out there. That never happens in reality. And in fact, in reality, people make a lot of dumb choices to help other people in crisis situations, time and time and time and time again. So I've come to really have this appreciation for a movie like Slumber Party Massacre, which they have the scene where one of the girls is running from the killer. She's banging on the door, let me in, let me in. The girls don't even blink. The other one, they open the door right, and the killer gets in the house and kills a bunch of them. But they're like, how could they leave their friend out there? They don't even think about it. They let her in. Or Return of the Living Dead, where there's almost no fighting between the survivors. They're just like, okay, what do we do next? Where do we go? Like, let's figure this out. So I have a hard time with zombie movies because they don't have the empathy, or the altruism, and I gravitate harder to the ones that do.
I have a difficulty myself lately with sort of sad horror. It seems to be there's a lot of the books that everyone's raving about. They're talking about how heartbreaking they found them and how soul destroying and crushing, and they seem to like that. And I don't know if that sounds like a good time to me. Which something I find harder to find is fun horror, which is why Paperbacks of Horror was so great. It sort of opened up this world, and I mean, what kind of odyssey was that? Are you still on the Paperbacks from Hell journey?
I'm still addicted. I have a newsletter from my website where every few weeks I'll read another one of these books and write about it. It's still, you still find gems out there. You still find ridiculous stuff out there. I still love it. But honestly, I was writing these columns for Tor.com where I was just randomly reading paperbacks I find in swap shops, and my editor said, I don't think we'd buy this book, but pitch us a book of these essays. And so I did, and they bought it. And I had 10 months to write it because it was between two books on a contract. And so Will Erickson, who writes Too Much Horror Fiction blog, I got him on board to sort of like talk it through with me, like, what's the story here? What's the arc? And there was one, which we managed to figure out, but I love that stuff. And publishing was so different in the 70s and 80s than it is now, that stuff you could have more low-calorie fiction where this is about dogs killing people on an island, the end. And, it didn't have to have a bigger... It wasn't like, oh, my child has died and we've retreated to this island to be sad, and sad dogs who ate our child are now going to kill us. Like, there wasn't, like you're saying, that's sort of like... which I feel like is sort of the cheapest gesture, a dead child or a dead wife. I'm just so stuff where it's like, okay, moths, they're killing everyone. There we go. I love that stuff.
It's great fun. Do you find it harder to find those books now since?
It's crazy. Will just emailed me because someone emailed him who reads his blog. It's like, oh, this is this book I read as a kid. It's about this girl, and everyone thinks she's their dead daughter, and they pass her around the community, and they all treat her as a different... And we'd never heard of this book. And between us, Will and I have read thousands of these paperbacks. And the fact that people are still pulling up new ones that we've never even heard of something similar, so it's a bottomless ocean.
A lot of the authors that wrote these books weren't writing for terribly long. I mean, there was obviously the horror publishing collapse on both sides of the Atlantic through the 90s and early 2000s, and these people disappeared into obscurity or went and did something else. Have you had an opportunity to meet or interact with any of the horrors that have been sort of rediscovered through this?
Yeah, that's been one of the nicest things about doing Paperbacks from Hell, is meeting the authors and the cover artist, who always had their signature cropped off the cover, blurred out. You won't get credit for this. It's been brilliant. I mean, two of the nicest moments for me. One is Elizabeth Engstrom, who wrote When Darkness Loves Us. We brought it back into print with this small press Valancourt. And I got this call from her, and I think the book's brilliant. I got this call from her, she's like, I just got a royalty check for When Darkness Loves Us. She's like, that hasn't happened to me since 1982.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah. And she's like, thanks? I was like, yeah, sure. But it was such a pleasure to expose people to those books. They're so good. Barry Wood, she hates her book, The Tribe. I think it's brilliant. But to be able to introduce that book to people is great. And Ken Greenhall, who is a genius writer who died really unsung and undiscovered. Will and I, between really all of his books are back in print except for one. And his widow actually called me and was saying, and I had talked to her and interviewed her, and she was just like, she called me up and she said, hey, I hear you're doing this show and you talk about Ken's books. I said, yeah, Agnes, I do. Is that okay? She goes, he would have loved it. Click. And I was like, and it was just, I don't know, it's so nice just that these people are getting their day in court, Do
you think there's something about horror in particular, regardless of the time period that it's written in, that the stories somehow endure? In a way that's better than,
it's
more
hard.
successfully than other
It's
genres.
hard because I don't know other genres as well, but like I read a lot of men's adventure fiction because I read it as a kid and it's fun to read. But often,
That's something that's completely disappeared now.
Yeah, it's completely disappeared. And also the other thing is like, it's 70s, so they're fighting terrorists. Or, you know what I mean? It's like the threats are so timely that it dates very hard. And so there is something more evergreen about horror. Gothic romances I've been reading a lot of recently, and some are a blast, but they tend to be a little more formulaic than horror is. A horror can be supernatural, non-supernatural. Whatever. Gothic romances, yes, they were supernatural and non-supernatural, but they're very often, usually, they begin with the scene of arriving at the house in a storm, and so. But also, I don't know the genres as well. But horror to me seems pretty limitless. But that could just be personal prejudice on my part.
No, and one other aspect of horror which makes it interesting is it's an interesting way to sort of pursue some grander sort of themes or politics. I know you said you're quite a politically active person, but also delving into subject areas and characters, which as a white middle class man is not necessarily someone might consider your purview. What do you think is sort of the important things to keep in mind when exploring this?
Well, for me, it's sort of three things. Well, one, I think is just general, is never punch down. Like, you never make a joke at someone less powerful's expense. But the other two things are just don't be an asshole and really realize where you're writing from, To me, women are characters, and writing a female character comes very naturally to me. I enjoy it. I know and there's places I won't go. I don't write very many sex scenes just because that to me is going to get me into deep waters that I'm not ready to explore. I wrote one sexual assault scene in Southern Book Club. Only one I've ever written. I didn't like doing it. It had to happen for plot and story reasons. I never want to do that again. It was really unpleasant, but it was interesting because I realized the way into that finally was to do it from the victim's point of view and to have them be relating it afterwards to someone rather than seeing it happen, because then they got to censor it the way they were. They didn't have to give the details they didn't want to give. It sounds crazy. It's a character I made up, but like she could respect her own sort of dignity within that. But yeah, it's tough. Writing black characters, I am very, very cautious about because, I didn't grow up black. That may not be obvious to you, and that's a different worldview, especially in the States, and a really different experience of existing in the States that is alien to me. But one of the greatest things I think has happened to horror is this push for diversity in publishing. I don't need to hear what another middle-aged white man has to say, because if I want to hear that, I can talk to myself. Like, I want to hear what a Cherokee possession story is, or a Pacific Islander haunted house story is, or a Black American a zombie novel is. I want to hear those. I just like new stories. I like new stuff. I want to see things I've never seen before, and that's where it's coming from. So I think that is amazing.
Absolutely. And talking of stuff that we haven't seen before, what might we be seeing from you in the future?
So my next book is called How to Sell a Haunted House. It's coming out in January, and it's the last. So I did My Best Friend's Exorcism and Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and this are the three books I've ever set in my hometown in the neighborhood where I grew up. It's the last one I'll ever do. I didn't mean to write a trilogy, but it kind of wound up that way. And but it's a haunted house book, and it's about haunted puppets and dolls. Because they're terrifying. So that chapter just is done, thank God, and now I'm on to the next one, which I don't want to talk about yet because I don't want to curse it. But so I was really happy to get that to where it needed to be because it was harder than usual.
Excellent. How to Sell a Haunted House.
Yeah.
In this market.
Coming out from Titan.
Coming out from Titan. Fantastic. So Grady, often referred to as the
Wait,
best.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but what's your genre? Mine's zombies. What's the preferred horror, like what's your sweet spot for horror movies?
For horror movies, I like creatively supernatural, other worlds.
Okay. Other worlds,
well,
like what's your favorite? Like where's your...
I really love Hellraiser or Prince of Darkness.
Okay,
Things
yeah.
that other dimensions opening up portals to various places.
You know, it's wild to me that Hellraiser so stands alone. Like, there's not a lot of knockoffs. Like,
No,
you know what I mean?
I would like to do some knockoffs.
I mean, they've made sequels of decreasing quality, but
Yeah, they don't get it right.
But it really is. I rewatched the original recently, and I was astonished at just how original and unlike anything else it was.
Mm-hmm. And it's getting on now, and it still has that originality to
Yeah.
it, because I think there's a lot more stuff to be tapped into in those ideas.
Yeah.
So I've been speaking to Grady Hendrix. Some people refer to him as the best dressed man in horror. I mean, arguably.
Or yeah,
I would
exactly.
say.
I mean, you've got a pocket square going. I stand in awe.
But Grady, that's been fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man.